Welcome back to the Rules of Language Learning. My name is Olly Richards and I'm about to make enemies of half the planet with this one, so let's see how it goes. Now let's see, there were four of them I think. Or was it five? Ross, Joey, Phoebe, Monica, Chandler and Rachel. Okay, I admit it, I had to look that up, and yes, that is six friends. Now, apparently back in the day there was a TV series called Friends, and it turns out that it was actually quite popular. Now, according to Google, Friends came out in 1994, and as I recall it, in 1994 my TV of choice was much more like Star Trek: The Next Generation, and let's face it, Klingons and Vulcans are far more interesting than a bunch of people lounging around drinking coffee in some New York cafe or whatever it is that these friends actually did. Anyway, being the contrarian that I am, while everyone around me was talking about nothing but this thing called Friends, I refused point blank to watch a single episode. And let me tell you, I was proud of being the only person in my school who refused to waste their time watching such nonsense, and that was that. Until, that is, many years later when I started my website, I Will Teach You a Language. You see, when I started blogging, I began to hear from people all around the world who were learning languages, and they would tell me their secrets for learning languages. Some people study at university for 4 years, some people up sticks and move to another country, others study at home and learn in their local communities. But as I started hearing all these fantastic language learning stories from around the world, there was one group of people in particular who caught my attention. One group of successful language learners, many of whom had used the exact same method to become highly fluent in a second language. A magic method, it would appear. A method that seems to have produced more proven, documented fluent speakers than any other. And what is that method, I hear you ask? Well, it's simple, you just watch Friends. You see, the group of people I'm talking about is English learners. The good people from around the world who have learned English as a second language, and more often than not, when they email me and they tell me how they did it, they say, when I was a teenager, I just watched Friends every night for about 6 years, and I was fluent in English by the end. That's it. You can just picture it, can't you? Teenagers from Japan to Mexico to Brazil to Azerbaijan, they're sitting out in their rooms streaming Friends on their iPad, and for years on end they're doing this, and they're learning English to a very, very high level. You've probably met many of these people. Now, forget 6 years. Watching Friends for even 6 minutes sounds like a fate worse than death to me, but there is a very important language learning lesson hiding in there. Now, I don't know for what ungodly reason people seem to like Friends, but I will admit it, they do. They absolutely love it. For your average teenager, and maybe even the odd adult as well, they love Friends so much that they are willing to spend years of their life watching it. And I'm actually curious whether you're a Friends fan or not. Do I Will Teach You a Language subscribers also watch Friends? Let me know in a comment below. Anyway, for these Friends fanatics, Friends represents something we can call compelling input. And compelling input, my friend, that is their secret language learning weapon. You know, it can be hard for the average adult to find any time to learn languages, right? Even managing half an hour of listening or reading practice in the evening after work is pretty hard for a lot of people. But when you love something as much as people love Friends, you will find the time. When you're that desperate to find out what happens next in the story, you will stop eating, you'll stop going out, you will even stop showering if that's what it takes to fit in another episode of Friends into your evening. And this means that for these people with almost zero willpower needed, they get massive amounts of exposure to English. Massive, absolutely huge. Now, I hear you say, when you watch Friends, you get the wrong kind of English, it's American English. And you would be right, it is not British English, but even if you're learning the wrong English, when you're spending hours every day immersed in that language for years on end, there really is very little need to actually study English in a more formal way, because the sheer volume of input you're getting is going to teach you everything that you need to know. Far more than learning word lists or slaving over a bunch of grammar exercises. And let's face it, 6 years of TV is going to be a lot more fun. But that is the point, ladies and gentlemen. If it is fun, you will do more of it. And I've seriously been blown away by the number of people who have learned English in this way, and there's no doubting the power of this kind of learning. Now, you may be sitting there asking yourself, well, how can I do this? I mean, am I really just supposed to sit and watch Friends for 6 years? Well, no, my friend, I would not wish that on my worst enemy. And in fact, the fundamental problem with the Friends method as a language learning strategy is that your average adult simply doesn't have 6 years to sit and watch hours of TV every single night. Not only that, but just because a lot of teenagers learn English this way, that's not to say that you can't learn a language faster through other means, because you certainly can. And that's what I'm talking about in these rules of language learning. So subscribe to the channel right now. So don't try to copy the Friends method yourself. Save yourself the 6 years. But what we can do from this method is to tease out the one hugely important lesson: the power of compelling input. The more that you love the immersion material you're using, the easier it'll be to find the time to do enough of it. You need material in the language that excites you so much, material so compelling that it doesn't even feel like study. That's what Friends represents to teenagers learning English. Even if it's far above your level, your desire to understand will propel you forward and you'll learn out of necessity. So whatever your guilty pleasure is, books, magazines, TV, whatever it may be, go and find the equivalent of that in the language that you're learning. Last year, for example, I found an incredible Spanish TV drama called Cassidy Babette. My God, I haven't been so glued to the TV for years. I was sitting up until 3 in the morning watching this thing play out, and that is very unlike me, let me tell you that. Now, unfortunately, there are only 2 short series in this particular drama, so it was over before I knew it. But I soaked up so much Spanish over the course of those 2 series that I forgot what it was like to speak English. Absolutely brilliant. Finding compelling content in your target language, whatever it may be, it has the power to totally transform your experience of learning the language. Not only will you have a lot more fun, you'll be spending far more time in the company of the language, immersed in the language, and it will never ever feel like a chore. So whatever it is that represents compelling input, compelling content for you, figure out what it is, and then move heaven and earth to find it. Thanks for checking out the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did enjoy it and you'd like me to continue this series of the rules of language learning, then you can let me know by liking this video. Also, if you'd like to be notified when I upload new videos every week, then you can subscribe to the channel using the big red button below, and the videos will pop right up in your news feed.